Seen a day of unprecedented protests against President Mubarak's leadership, with thousands of demonstrators on the streets. The headquarters of the governing party has been set ablaze and a curfew extended across the country. The United States says the situation is of deep concern. Troops are on the streets of Egypt's capital as the government struggles to quell widespread rioting. Thousands of people are taking part in the biggest anti-government protests for over 30 years. At least one person has been killed in clashes with riot police using tear gas and rubber bullets. Soldiers are enforcing a curfew in the country as President Mubarak faces the biggest ever challenge to his authority. Our Cairo correspondent John Line witnessed a day of protest and violence.
A prayer for Egypt, perhaps. This country surely needs it today. Amongst these worshippers, Nobel Peace Prize winner Mohammed al-Baradei come to support the protests. The lines are drawn. Then, as Friday prayers end, it erupts. President Mubarak's poster is the first target. Then they confront the riot police. They try water cannon, but these crowds have lost their fear. Then out comes the tear gas.
That smoke behind me is tear gas, and they've been firing that all day, the last hour or two. The water cannon they've given up on, it doesn't drive the protesters away. Every now and then a barrage of tear gas comes through. It really stings you. And the people are pushed back, but they're not giving up. They're absolutely furious against their government and against President Mubarak.
He is definitely finished.
A tear gas canister just misses us.
He will finish tonight. Definitely will finish tonight.
Look at who they are. Young people who've been driven crazy by the way their country is being run. Egyptians who talk to each other on Facebook and Twitter. Educated English speakers, not the older, poorer supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood.
People here in Egypt, you need freedom, you know, freedom. This government, it's so bad.
The police are not giving up, firing huge quantities of tear gas.
We are saying enough with the regime. This is a corrupt regime. We are saying enough with this regime.
In other confrontations, the police have brought out the shotguns. The casualties are bound to mount. You can see the police tactics. Hold the line, same as they've been doing for 30 years. They're not giving an inch, and neither is the government. Not a hint of compromise, hardly a word from anyone in authority. But suddenly it's all changed. The crowds keep coming and coming. Years of anger against corruption, poverty, a government they believe treats them with contempt, and foreign countries that supply that government with arms. It's all spilling out. Tonight, the military have declared a curfew in Cairo, Alexandria and Suez. But the protests are continuing and the fires are burning. With the army on the streets, you wonder if there's anything they can do now to extend President Mubarak's 3 decades in power. John Line, BBC News, Cairo.
Well, Middle East envoy and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair has been giving his reaction to the protests in Egypt and Tunisia. He's in the Swiss ski resort of Davos for the World Economic Forum. Speaking to my colleague Nick Gowing, Mr. Blair said the region is going through a period of transition.
Look, it's difficult to talk about these things. They're very fast-moving and so on. What I think is essentially happening is that there is a process of change going on in the Middle East and the whole of the region. And the question is, where do we end up? You know, because there are elements of people who want to see more modern, more democratic government. There are also elements, frankly, that would exploit the situation and take it in an extreme direction. I think the important thing is, however it's done, we manage it and manage that process of change in a way that allows, you know, these countries to be stable, and for transition to happen in an orderly way.
I must press you, what do you mean by manage, though? You have an elite who've been in power for many years.
Yeah, and the people, I deal with every day in the peace process. So I've dealt with and by the way, had a, very good relationship with President Mubarak over the years.
But a disillusioned youth, a younger generation, plus others who are now on the streets.
Correct, but that's why it's important that as this process of change happens, it happens in a way that is stable. Because actually what is important for all of these countries, especially when, in any event in Egypt, there will be change in time to come, there will be change in other parts and other countries in that region. What's important is that it happens in a way where the country ends up in a better place.
And a bit of breaking news here. Kuwait Airways says it suspended flights to Egypt. Suspended all the flights to Egypt on Friday, and it's waiting for the situation to stabilize following anti-government protests there. That's according to Al Arabiya Television and Reuters news agency. You can get your latest headlines online as well with our 1-minute news summary. Watch the news unfold at bbc.com/news. Also on the website, you can see more on our top story. Tens of thousands of protesters are on the streets of Egypt, clashing with riot police around the country. A curfew has now been extended from the main cities to cover the whole of the country. In Cairo, the headquarters of President Mubarak's National Democratic Party was set ablaze, as you can see in those pictures. And we have reports of military helicopters in the skies above Cairo. Troops are also on the streets there and in Suez, and shots have been fired. The fourth straight day of protests began after Friday prayers there and brought a cross-section of Egyptian society onto the streets. Dozens of protesters have been injured in the clashes. More on those stories on bbc.com.